Thank you all for coming this early on a Sunday morning to this last of a series of 4 events that have been jointly organized by the Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies at Columbia University, Fordham University, and the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. I'm Jonathan BRENT, Executive Director of YIVO. These events have explored the complex and often misunderstood past of Poland's Christian majority and its Jewish minority. The series has aimed to provide the conceptual tools to foster better understanding of Poland's history, Polish-Jewish relations, and the tensions between history and memory, exclusion, belonging, national ideologies, identities, and antisemitism. This series is a beginning. It is not an end. The series is intended to open dialogue, as the name of the series indicates. It is not intended to provide an end to the discussion with conclusions. Since its founding in Vilna, Poland in 1925, Jewish life in Poland has been one of YIVO's core interests, and YIVO has been a space where such critical discussion and dialogue can occur. YIVO's archive contains some 23 million documents, political materials of all sorts, from Zionism to BRENT, communal records, diaries, letters, literary manuscripts, plays, poetry, memoirs, educational materials, treatises on cosmology, law, political and theatrical posters, buttons, bunkers, jokes, pornography, medicine, the unique collection of Yiddish pornography, by the way, and 7 million documents pertaining to the Holocaust. YIVO's library has some 400,000 volumes, including many rare and unique materials in Yiddish, Polish, Russian, German, and numerous other languages. In 2013, YIVO created a website devoted to Jews and Polish culture, which is called the YIVO Digital Archive on Jewish Life in Poland. It provides access to over 50 archival collections with Polish materials, including finding aids, digital images, sound recordings, and rare films of Jewish life in pre-World War II Poland. I should also mention in this regard YIVO's annual study trips to Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine that are led by the historian Professor Samuel Kassow. And there is information about going on these tours if any of you is interested outside. The life of Jews in Poland for nearly 1,000 years and the civilization they built during that time was destroyed in the Holocaust and its Soviet aftermath. The resonance of that destruction has not been dispelled by time. It remains at the core of what Szymon Dubnow called Jewish historical consciousness, by which we understand ourselves as a people. The memory and image of that destruction has often preempted understanding of the life that preceded it, a life that was dynamic, creative, multifarious, which engaged all strata of society and left lasting marks not just on Jewish culture worldwide, but on Polish, European, and American culture generally. And unfortunately, the discussion of this life, this complex, variegated life, is all too often excluded from public discussion because of the horror of World War II and the Holocaust. We hope that this series, culminating in today's symposium, will help restore a sense of the completeness or wholeness of that once great civilization of Jews in Poland. The factors, both internal and external, that shaped it, and the men and women who were part of it, from whom many in this room today are descended, as are indeed the majority of Ashkenazi Jews alive today around the world. It is important to recall at the outset of today's discussions the terrible events that have recently taken place in Pittsburgh and Poway, California, to note that anti-Jewish incidents and violence has risen dramatically in the United States and around the world over recent years, and that this phenomenon in the United States is connected to the rise of white ethno-nationalism around the world. An important element embedded in this nationalism is the myth of Judeo-Communa, which will be discussed later today, Judeo-Communism, that was popularized by the Nazis and was almost immediately imported into the United States by Henry Ford in 1920 through his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. It became the rallying cry of 20,000 American Nazis who gathered in Madison Square Garden on February 20th, 1939. Fragments of which gathering have recently been made available in the documentary film A Night in the Garden, which is available on the internet if you care to look at it. It's one of the most horrifying 5 minutes, I think you will see. It informed the hate slogans of the recent march of white nationalists in Charlottesville and was heard shouted by Polish demonstrators outside the federal building here in New York City 6 weeks ago. The myth that all Jews are communists and are therefore disloyal and subversive is as dangerous a slander as the blood libel. It is a warrant for genocide and must be exposed and opposed. It is a danger not only to Jews, but to all liberal democratic society. How and why is this still alive in Poland, in the United States, in Europe, in Russia, and elsewhere? This February, the February 2019 Holocaust Conference in Paris that was disrupted by Polish protesters provides yet another example of the vehemence this nationalist ideology can take and why open critical discussion of the subject of Jewish-Polish relations is so difficult and so necessary today. Ideas have consequences. False ideas, such as Holocaust denial, or that Jews themselves were responsible for the Holocaust, have very destructive consequences unless opposed and challenged. That's what this symposium and this whole series intends to do. I wish to thank the Center for Jewish History, YIVO's partners at the Center, the American Jewish Historical Society, the Leo Beck Institute, the American Sephardi Federation, and our other institutional partners, Fordham University and Columbia University, for participating in and supporting this conference. In particular, I wish to thank MAGDA TETER, head of Jewish Studies at Fordham University, Agnieszka Legutko, lecturer in Yiddish at Columbia, and Małgorzata Mazurik, associate professor of Polish Studies at Columbia University. Alex Weiser, director of programs at YIVO, has worked tirelessly on this program as he does on all of our programs. Thank you. Thank you all. I wish also to thank Anji Royek for his support and the members of the YIVO board who are present today. And if they are not here in the hall now, I expect them to come in later. Ruth Levine, who is chairman of our board, and Irene Pletka, vice chairman of our board. We are especially honored to have with us today Miron Blumenthal and his family. Miron is the son of Nachman Blumenthal, the founder of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw and director of Zich in Warsaw. Miron has generously donated his father's great and extensive archive to the YIVO Institute, possibly the last great Holocaust collection still to be archived and studied. Nachman, would you stand, please? A small exhibit of these materials can be found in the Great Hall outside this auditorium. I invite you all to have a look at it. I also invite you all to have a look at the YIVO exhibit on immigration that is just down the hall in the Constantiner Gallery called It's an extraordinary collection of cartoons from the Yiddish press in the 1920s about American immigration practices. Today's events are live streamed and will be available as a video recording on YIVO's YouTube channel and will be posted on our website. Please close your cell phones now. It is now my great pleasure to welcome MAGDA TETER to the podium. MAGDA.
Thank you all for coming. I know you really would like to be on your bicycles, but unfortunately the rain has brought you here. So I'm very grateful for your presence, and it is truly a very humbling experience when we brought the program that so many experts and such volumes of scholarship that these people here produce, and many of them were participants and lived through the events we will discuss all through this day. We cannot escape history, said Abraham Lincoln a month before signing the Emancipation Proclamation. Or, in Desmond Tutu's words, some pasts refuse to lie down quietly. Indeed, no nation is comprised of only the glorious and the heroic. And if such story is told, that's nothing but imagined past. For all nations have dark parts of their past, and often even skeletons in their closets, including the real ones. As historian Margaret Macmillan said, we can still have heroes, but we have to accept that in history, as in our own lives, very little is absolutely black and absolutely white. And just as in our own lives, it's difficult for nations, religious institutions, and other groups to acknowledge those less glorious parts of our lives and pasts. It is particularly difficult to do so when history becomes politicized and mythologized, when it is manipulated for political reasons. For history is as much about remembering the past as about forgetting. And the manipulation is about what is remembered and what is forgotten. Such is not just bad history, but it is also a dangerous history, which sooner or later will present its bill. After World War II, many European countries engaged in what some scholars dubbed collective amnesia, or even rewriting of the past. Austria, for example, began to redefine itself as the first victim of the Nazis. France amplified the resistance. And Western Germany, after trials of some high-profile Nazi leaders, allowed for silence to prevail. Poland, under communist rule, also chose to mute and forget certain parts of its past, resulting in the creation of the so-called white stains, or in Polish, białe plamy historii, which covered the Katyn massacre, the September 17, 1939 Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement to divide Poland, and also the discussion about the murder of Jews in Poland. While Nazi death camps were inescapable, as was the memory of World War II, which was ever present in the landscape in schools and on TV under communist regime, the Nazi crimes were internationalized, highlighting countries of citizenship of the victims, rarely mentioning that Jews were the primary or the majority of the victims of many of the death camps. This phenomenon, however, was not just limited to Poland. Already in August 1945, the so-called Nuremberg Charter that set guidelines for the prosecution of Nazi officials in Nuremberg defined three categories of crimes: crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Poland's Jewish survivors helped gather evidence against Nazis documenting the destruction of Jews in Europe, but the framing around much more generally conceived crimes against humanity set the international precedent for obscuring the specific character of what happened to Jews during the war. It also gave cover to European countries, including France or Poland, which could now focus on presenting more general human devastation of the war as Nazi, or in Poland, Hitlerite crimes against humanities, without specifying the Nazi obsession with Jews. For decades then, Poles in post-World War II have been told about 6 million Polish victims of the Nazis, the number that was set in the 1947 report. So when in the late 1980s, the discussions began to note a large number of Jews among these victims, breaking the numbers into 3 million of Jews, or 90% of pre-war Polish Jewish population, and some 2 million Poles and additional hundreds of thousands or million other ethnicities, it felt like Polish suffering was being diminished, and the competition in suffering began to be more pronounced. History was again politicized to defend the now deeply rooted collective memory afflicted by an earlier amnesia. An amnesia that was periodically challenged through books and film. Still, as the collective memory was challenged, both sadism and false symmetries, insensitive to historical context and the differences between the Polish and Jewish war experiences began to be heard. Such politicization of history did not end with the communist regime. In fact, politicization, though in a mirror image, began soon after the end of the communist rule, when the pent-up hatred of the regime was manifested in the focus on an amplification of the communist crimes. Now the crimes of two regimes helped shield Poles from facing their own agency as historical actors, rather than passive victims of observers of historical events brought about by the Nazi and the communist regimes. But the focus on the Nazi era, or even Nazi crimes, began to recede from focus. The December 1998 Act of the Institute on National Remembrance established a commission for the prosecution of crimes against the Polish nation. This is the same law whose revisions arose controversy last year in November 2018 and led us to organize this series in dialogue on Polish-Jewish relations, to unpack the complex and compellingly textured shared Polish-Jewish past, a centuries-old past that does not neatly fit into ideological categories, but a past that is so vulnerable to politicization and abuse. And by the way, the revision of the law that created such an uproar also did not just upset the people involved in Jewish research, but also Ukrainians, because the Article 2 was revised to include the role of Ukrainians and the atrocities. But let's return to the 1998 original act. The preamble of the act mentioned the enormity and the number of victims, the losses and damages suffered by the Polish people during World War II and after it ended. It mentioned the patriotic tradition of the struggle of the Polish people against occupiers, the Nazism and communism, and echoed the language of the Nuremberg Charter, the obligation to prosecute the crimes against peace and humanity and war crimes. But examined closely, it is clear that the Institute of National Remembrance Act was primarily aimed at the communist era, with Nazi-era crimes only as an add-on, but not of central interest. The language and the parameters cannot be clearer. Article 1 stated that the Act regulates the recording, collecting, storing, processing, securing, making available and publishing of documents of the state security authorities produced and accumulated from July 22nd, 1944 until July 31st, 1990, as well as the documents of the security authorities of the Third Reich and the Soviet Union relating the Nazi, the communist, and other crimes against peace, humanity, or war crimes perpetrators on persons of Polish nationality or Polish citizens of other nationalities between November 8, 1917 until July 31st, 1990. In fact, the word Nazi appears only twice, Third Reich also only twice, but the phrase communist appears 10 times, including the phrase communist crimes appearing 5 times. In fact, Article 2 of this original act is devoted in full to communist crimes. No separate article devoted to Nazi crimes exists in this document at all. The dates are significant as well. They too signal the primary focus on communism, July 22nd, 1944 and November 8th, 1917. 1944 appears 10 times in the Act. 1939, the beginning of Nazi occupation, only twice. At our last session, someone asked, when did the attention shift away from Nazi crimes? I think one place to look is in the post-communist approach to the past. The Institute of National Remembrance Act, in which a pent-up energy for the communist rule shifted its gaze away from World War II and atrocities committed then, played a major role. In post-communist Poland, history began to be politicized again, but in a different direction, creating a new collective memory that emphasized actions performed by the officers of the communist state who were defined as public functionary, as well as a person who granted equal protection to that of a public functionary, and in particular, a public functionary and a person who performed executive functions within the statutory body of the communist parties. This shift away from Nazi-era crimes to communist crimes prepared the ground for the revival of the anti-Semitic trope of Judeo-communism, or Żydokomuna, which emerged soon after the October Revolution, but which became deployed in Polish nationalist propaganda as early as 1918, and perhaps even earlier. And the myth then gained power thanks to the Nazi propaganda fanning fears of Judeo-Bolshevism. And then in the 1940s, in Poland, with anti-communist opposition. In fact, in post-World War II, the role Poles played in the communist regime has been minimized or explained away at the expense of Jews. An average Pole, as Bishop Czesław Kaczmarek of Kielce noted in his report after the Kielce pogrom, thinks, whether it is accurate or inaccurate, that among the only true and sincere supporters of communism in Poland are primarily Jews. Because the vast majority of communist Poles are, according to this general opinion, only opportunists, without ideology, who are communists only because it's worth for them, że i się to sowicie opłaca. And I know we'll hear more about it later today, but this obsession with communism, along with the trope of Judeo-communism, or Żydokomuna, has been, in my mind, a major stumbling block in real reconciliation and real efforts to face the past. Nazi occupation, the communist rule, and anti-communists communism have effectively become shields preventing the real exploration of the shared Polish-Jewish past. This inability to deal with the past fed into narratives based in myths and counter-myths embraced by Poles and Jews. And here you have the two myths we discussed in the very first session. Both of those myths, the myth and counter-myth, paradoxically reach the same false conclusion of alienation of Jews from Poland and after the Shoah. For Jews, it helped explain to them why their Polish neighbors often stood by or worse participated in murders. For Poles, it helped to see the destruction of Polish Jews as a distinct experience, a separate part of World War II, disconnected from the Polish experience. And in fact, even the idea of bystanders, problematic as it was, also has served to reinforce the narrative of separate pasts, of Jews as victims of Nazis, and of Poles observing from a distance, also as victims of Nazis. The result then became that Polish-Jewish relations have often been discussed in the realm of emotions and stereotypes. In this series, we have tried to complicate and unpack some of these stories. This is what historians do. They often, as historian Michael Howard said, explode national myths. It is a task filled with landmines for challenging comfortable assumptions about the collective past, and it is painful. But it is also a mark of maturity. It is perhaps telling that lawmakers in post-communist Poland chose to create an institute, not an institute of national history, but an institute of national remembrance. But it is not through myth and memory that we can find reconciliation. Memory tends to oversimplify the past, idealize it, clean it, provide narratives that seek to justify what happened, good or bad. Memory tends to address the emotions. History, on the other hand, I think may provide a way out. As historian Elliot Gorn poignantly said, history comprises of knowledge of painful things, painfully arrived at. Memory, notions of the past that flatter us with easy myths and sometimes cheap emotions. Historians, he argued, occupy a tiny space where richness of the past is kept alive, where competing voices can still be heard. One of the most important things historians do is to bear witness to the past, including its horrors, in order to battle amnesia that would sweep away all the difficult and the repugnant. And if there is a model for a way out and facing and overcoming the painful past, it is, I believe, Jewish-Catholic reconciliation. It was an honest look at the past, through accurate studies, and after centuries of animosities, even violence, it helped the two communities to join in a friendship, sometimes difficult, and in a dialogue. As Archbishop Stanisław Gondecki noticed, the dialogue with Judaism required a lot of courage. Its commandment was a rule: do not be afraid of difficult dialogue, in which we will discuss, respectful of the truth, and in the spirit of kindness, difficult matters. A dialogue in which a path to accord leads at times through contention. This, for me, is a model to follow for Polish-Jewish dialogue. As Archbishop Gondecki also said, Polish-Jewish dialogue is Poland's dialogue with its own identity. As such, it demands an honest look at the past as a shared history, in all its colors, not as a Polish history or a Jewish history, but a shared history. Such an honest approach, as historian Margaret Macmillan noted, can only be healthy for societies struggling to deal with past horrors. And I hope you'll join us today in this spirit to explore this period, difficult past, and that shared history. Thank you.